Yeah, thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Really, at the heart of these amendments is the idea of the once-only collection of data that the government is proposing, and it seems to be justified solely on the grounds of efficiency, so-called, although efficient for whom is not really clear. I suppose if you boil things down to basics, the bill has two main goals: to provide a legal basis for public bodies to share data between each other, the sharing bit as it were, and to set down safeguards for the individuals whose data is being shared, the governance in other words. And while the sharing bit is something that the government has clearly spent quite a lot of time thinking about, our key concern boils down to the fact that the governance aspect of it doesn't seem to be as well developed at all, and that is potentially a huge problem for the state in upcoming litigation in the years ahead. Now, one of the arguments for the sharing bit of this bill is that, well, it's an absolute pain if you have to give your to every public service body that you might have to interact with, if you have to give them your details every time you sign up. So it goes, the sharing is pitched as, well, this is just to make it super handy for everybody, that they have the information, so you don't need to bother about that. But not everybody will be of that view. If you like, if you take the example of Google, like Google is a really very handy search engine. Everybody would agree with that. But it also, what happens, it happens to do worrying and intrusive things with your data as well. Now, for a lot of people, they might say, well, that's fine. I'm happy with that trade-off. It doesn't really bother me all that much. And that's grand. Those people aren't affected by anything we're doing here. For most people, the trade-off is worth it. But not for everybody, and for some people it isn't. And I'd put it to you, like, if the government was trying to implement a system where we all had to, by law, use Google and accept the privacy trade-off, that'd be pretty extreme and outrageous, and there'd be a big outcry about that. But that's what the government is trying to do here in opposing our amendments. It's not really that different. What you're saying is, if you want to use public services, you must sacrifice control of your privacy data. A lot of people couldn't care less. That's a trade-off they'd be happy to make. But some people will care, and the law and European law is on their side, and we are setting ourselves up for a hiding to nothing if our amendments are not accepted here. We have heard the government say previously that the ability to opt out isn't necessary, because people have a right to having to object after their data has been shared. But that's a bit late after the damage is done. We don't think that that is sufficient. I think if we look at it, private data really is best understood as a form of private property, something that I thought Fine Gael deputies in particular would have been very fond of. And if we use that as a metaphor here, well, data then in that sense is really like your own private house. And what the single customer view does is give the keys of your house to hundreds of different people and tell them they can come in anytime they like without you asking them. And what our amendments are trying to do is say, OK, look, you individual person, you can have a copy of our keys. It's very nice of you to come in and feed the cats while I'm away, but I'd rather that you didn't share my keys with everybody else without asking me first from now on. That's not a huge ask. That's what's been done here. That's all we're looking for. It's eminently reasonable, to be honest. And now I know the government has said, oh, that might be a bit costly to implement that, but we're only talking about small numbers, because most people will accept the trade-off for the convenience. But as I say, not all. The numbers won't be big. But I have to again put on the record, and I'll use an example for it. It's extremely likely that the government will be forced down the line to give people an opt-out, whether by an individual case being taken to Europe or by the European Commission. And it's far better that we address this now, before more specified bodies come on board and rolling this back gets even more expensive, because let's face it, that's what you're trying to do here. And we should say that we saw the other week the consequences of the government not listening when they were told that what they were doing wasn't legal and couldn't stand up. And we had the example of that in the Graham Dwyer case, who won his case with regard to the retention of mobile data. A former Chief Justice described the data retention and access system in Ireland as something that amounted to mass surveillance of the entire population and had told the government to fix it. The government ignored him. The Data Protection Commissioner, in her 2017 annual report, said that retaining the current regime of access to phone and internet records by state agencies is not an option. She said it's not an option. She was ignored too, and look where that mess got you. So really what we're saying here now, why don't we avoid setting ourselves up for another huge mess down the road, correct the problems that are there at the start by offering an opt-out for people who want one.